encouraged to read the Bible lightly. Esther was read very seriously, and it was all just deep and serious and to be considered. And while that's true, it's also a heck of a funny book. So, if you want to reread Esther in light of one of these movies, I don't know if any of you have watched the television show Fargo, where each episode is based on a real life event, and it goes from a murder to another murder to another murder, and each time it gets worse and worse and worse. It's by accident. And people just find themselves in these insane situations that they don't know how to get out of. So that's what the book of Esther is. Now, I can't possibly read the whole book of Esther to you this morning. Let me rephrase that. I could, but you wouldn't like me anymore. So I'm going to read a section from chapter 4 where Esther decides finally to take action, and then you'll hear the rest of the story in the sermon, although I had to leave out a lot, all right? So go back and read this story with an eye to the humor that exists in it. So Haytak, in this passage, is one of the eunuchs who takes care of the king's harem and the king's wives and the queen, all right? Haytak went and told Esther what Mordecai, her adoptive father, had said. And then Esther spoke to Haytak and gave him a message for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law: to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come to the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So it was a small step toward major changes in this kingdom in which King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. The king and his queen had a spat. He really deserved her wrath because he ordered her to appear at a party at which he and his buddies got flat out drunk, and he just wanted to show her off like a prize sow. Queen Vashti honestly didn't think that he'd even remember that she had refused to come, but the fellows got together and decided to punish her in order to keep their own wives in line. They even went so far as to send an official letter to proclaim that every man should be master in his own house. You see what I mean by humor? Bit ironic, actually, the letter coming from a king whose primary skills were throwing parties, getting drunk, and asking other people how to rule his kingdom. But anyway, what should have been nothing in the life of this kingdom resulted in no more Queen Vashti. She was banished from the kingdom. And then a roundup of beautiful virgins for the king. So Esther was taken as one of these virgins. Mordecai was a Jew who had been exiled to Susa, and he had adopted Esther as his own daughter when her parents died. So as she was rounded up to be taken to the king's palace, Mordecai warned her not to tell anyone that she was a Jew, but just to live day by day and do what was required. And so she did. Day by day, for 365 days, she had cosmetic treatments, because clearly beautiful women weren't really beautiful until they had been polished up by men. Do you hear the humor in that too? Guys. So when it was Esther's turn to go in, it was kingly love at first sight, because that's how these stories go. He immediately set the crown on Esther's head, made her queen, which of course meant it was time for another great party at the palace. He called it Esther's banquet, and he threw a holiday in for the little people as well, which made Esther pretty popular, I think, at this point. Now, Mordecai, who didn't get to come to the palace, had spent his days loitering at the king's gate and listening for news about his beloved Esther. For a year, nothing had happened until it was Esther's turn to go in to the king. And now she was Queen Esther, but she still really didn't have any power to speak of, so she just continued to live in the palace day by day, and Mordecai continued to sit at the gate day by day. The excitement here is palpable, don't you think? So apparently Mordecai at the gate just kind of became a fixture in the town, and he was there all the time, and people just kind of forgot he was there. It's kind of like driving your kids in the car. You know how they forget that you're there driving and they talk? People began to talk in front of Mordecai, and he overheard two of the king's eunuchs who were really angry with the king, something the king had done, and they conspired together at the gate to kill the king. Step 1, Mordecai told Queen Esther. Step 2, Queen Esther told the king. Step 3, the story was investigated, because you can't trust a woman, but it was found to be true. And step 4, the eunuchs were hung. Mordecai thought, perhaps, that revealing a plot against the king would elevate him to a position inside the palace so that he could be closer to Esther. Instead, a random guy named Haman gets promoted and elevated. Why? Because somebody drinking at the king's table probably told the king it was a good idea. The decision probably had more to do with too much alcohol and too little sense than it did with Haman's deserving to be promoted. But Haman took many steps to show everyone what a very big deal he was now. And he got the king to command that everyone bow down to Haman. And everyone did, because it was the king's order, except Mordecai. So having been promoted all of several days, a day after several days, Mordecai the Jew refusing to bow to him, Haman was furious. But since killing Mordecai seemed kind of beneath him, he set out to destroy all the Jews in the whole kingdom. Just another day in the court of King Ahasuerus. Jews who live in exile are looking for a way open. They wonder when God will restore the fortunes of Zion, which is a reference to the city of Jerusalem, when God will carry God's people again. The fact that Esther had been made queen might have indicated that way was opening for some kind of restoration. But now there were very busy workings behind the scene as Haman's conniving steps ensure the complete destruction of the Jews. Letters were sent, again, to all the king's provinces with orders to, and I quote, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which everybody knew was a bad luck day. And then all of the property and resources left from the dead Jews were up for grabs, plunder for everyone. And upon completion of this plan for genocide, which would be very hard work indeed, everybody sat down to drink. And all the Jews freaked out. Way open needed to be found, and found really quickly. And perhaps Mordecai remembered the passage from Isaiah, perhaps that frantic kind of remembering something that happened when you're exiled and threatened with annihilation, and you're seeking desperately to trust this God who carried God's people from birth, who carried from the womb through old age, and you're hoping against hope that this God will keep the promises he made when he said, I have made, and I will bear, and I will carry, and I will save. And in that passage, God demanded that the people take a good look at who they were tempted to trust all the time. These idols that they tended to make from the most beautiful things, the most expensive things, the most powerful people, the idols that we carry and that we set down, but who do not carry or answer or save us. And perhaps Mordecai looked at the beauty regimens and Esther's crown and at the excess of banquet food and drink and at a capricious and volatile king who could be manipulated. And perhaps Mordecai remembered where his trust needed to be placed. That God is the one that carries God's children step by step, preparing the way for God's purpose, God's intention, God's plan. Mordecai, I'm sure, remembered the stories of God's people. He remembered that the stories showed that when wealth and power and ego and anger and arrogance met, history, trust, faith, and willingness, that the way opened. The way was revealed step by step. So step by step, Esther and Mordecai enacted a plan to save not just themselves, but all of the Jews. Step 1. Esther decided to risk taking action at such a time as this. Step 2. And I have to leave out so much here, so please go back and read this. Haman saw Mordecai at his regular place at the king's gate and remembered his mad, which mixed then with his pride and his ego, and he built a 50-cubit pole on which to hang Mordecai. Step 3. For some unexplained reason, the king couldn't sleep. And so he asked his servants to bring the records of the kingdom and the annals of the kingdom to be read to him. I'm guessing that's the kind of material that would put you straight to sleep. But by chance, as they read these records, the king was reminded that Mordecai had saved his life and that he'd never been honored for that. Step 4. Haman entered the outer court to wait for the king so that he could speak to the king about hanging Mordecai. Step 5. Haman was invited in, and the king asked Haman what should be done to honor a special man. Step 6. Haman could not imagine who the king would wish to honor more than himself. And so he created a quite fabulous list of gifts and actions, all of which he knew he would thoroughly enjoy, including being dressed royally and led on horseback through the city streets. Step 7. The king gleefully and innocently sent Haman out to honor Mordecai with all the things that Haman thought he was getting. Now just tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor here. Step by step, the truth is revealed that Queen Esther is one of the Jews slated to be destroyed, and Haman is hanged on the pole that he had built for his sneaky wickedness. Mordecai's true identity was also revealed, and he was put in charge of Haman's fortune, since Haman wasn't around anymore. The king rescinded his letter, and the Jewish people were saved. Once again, step by step, God's intention and God's plan was enacted. God's steps. They're slow. They're deliberate. Sometimes they seem insignificant. There's steps that require trust and dependence on God, even though often we're just not even sure God is at work, and God is never mentioned in this story. The way open comes from God, who makes and carries us, who declares the outcome from the beginning, who asks from us trust and dependence, and who will deliver us as well, step by step. Amen.